I thought I'd seen it all, until my boss asked if I would date his son. For money. And the craziest part? He didn't want me to just date him. That ordinary day turned into one of the craziest days of my life. It started like any other Tuesday. My shirt was wrinkled, the elevator was slow, and the coffee tasted like it had been filtered through printer ink. I was halfway through sorting a spreadsheet when the assistant from the executive floor appeared behind my desk. Her smile clipped. "Mr. Blackwood wants to see you now," she said. I blinked. "Me?" Her shrug said everything and nothing. "Just head up. He's waiting." My stomach dropped. Mr. Blackwood, the CEO, was a man who didn't summon people unless something was either seriously wrong or about to get even worse. My mind spun with possibilities as I rode the elevator up. I hadn't missed any deadlines, hadn't stirred up office drama, but the glass doors to the top floor opened anyway, swallowing me into an atmosphere of quiet tension and too much carpet. His office was sleek and cold, like a high-rise cathedral. Mr. Blackwood was already seated behind his desk, his fingers steepled, his silver cufflinks catching the light, designed to intimidate. "Sit, Jordan," he said. I sat. He studied me for a moment, the pause stretching across the room like a wire about to snap. "I won't waste your time," he said. "I need a personal favor, one that won't affect your standing here if handled correctly." I nodded, managing a small smile. "Of course, sir." He didn't smile back. "It's about my son." That gave me pause. I barely knew he had a son. There were rumors, whispers, mentions of a son who traveled more than he stayed in one place. Quiet, hard to figure out, the kind of guy who appeared in magazine spreads, but not in board meetings. Mr. Blackwood continued, each word deliberate. "I'm concerned about him. Julian hasn't exactly flourished. He doesn't connect with people, doesn't trust easily. But I think that could change if someone like you spent time with him." I furrowed my brow. "Someone like me?" "You're grounded, level-headed, charismatic enough to hold your own, but not loud enough to intimidate him. He needs someone real." There was a pause. "You want me to befriend him?" "I want you to date him," he said bluntly. I blinked. "You heard me." I stared, speechless. "You want me to date your son?" Mr. Blackwood leaned forward slightly. "He trusts no one, but he notices people, and he's noticed you. I've seen it." 100 thoughts flooded my mind at once. "But I've never even spoken to him," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "You'll have your chance. You'll meet him tomorrow. Lunch. I'll cover the bill. I'll also compensate your time, of course." And there it was, the twist of the knife. "Compensate?" I repeated. 7,000 a month. Quietly wired. I froze. "This isn't prostitution, Jordan. This is companionship, company, presence. I want you to bring out the part of him he's buried." I should have walked out. I should have refused, politely or otherwise. But curiosity is a seductive thing, especially when it's wrapped in money and mystery. And deep down, something told me this wasn't just about the money. "What if he finds out?" I asked. "That's your job. Don't let him." I left his office in a daze. It wasn't just the absurdity of the request. It was the way Mr. Blackwood spoke, like he already knew I'd say yes. Like it wasn't a request, but a chess move he had already counted on me making. The next day came faster than I expected. I never expected Julian to show up 5 minutes late, dressed like someone who didn't care if the world saw him or not. His shirt was untucked, one side half-buttoned, the kind of casual wealth that made you wonder if he'd slept in a $2,000 jacket. He slid into the seat across from me and didn't smile. "So, you're the one?" he said. I swallowed. "Excuse me?" "My father's latest project," he explained, his tone almost dismissive. "Don't worry, he thinks he's subtle." "He isn't." I hesitated, unsure how to respond. "Is that what this is?" I asked. Julian tilted his head, his eyes narrowing slightly. They were an arresting shade of gray, sharp, piercing. "If it is, let's skip the performance. Are you going to play the charming office boy, or just sit there looking like you want to bolt?" Neither, I said before I could stop myself. Unless you want me to. Something flickered across his face. Maybe amusement, maybe interest. Cute answer. He picked up the menu like it was a prop, then set it down. I'm not a date guy, he said, his tone flat. I don't do small talk. So, if this is some plan to fix me, you're wasting your time. I wasn't told to fix you, I replied carefully. I was told to spend time with you. Julian leaned back in his seat. Uh-huh, he said. So you're getting paid? I froze. He smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was sharp, like a blade. Relax, I already knew. Before I could speak again, the waiter arrived and we ordered something forgettable. But I barely noticed because Julian's stare never left mine, like he was waiting to see what I'd lie about next. You're not like the others, he said after a beat. They usually pretend for longer. I'm not pretending, I said softly. Even better, he murmured. And that was when I realized I wasn't sure which of us was in control. By the end of the meal, he stood without saying goodbye. Come by tomorrow, he said, his voice flat. I'll text you the address. Bring nothing, just yourself. He walked off like it meant nothing, but it didn't feel like nothing. It felt like a fuse had been lit, and I didn't know how long I had before it reached something explosive. That night, I barely slept. My phone buzzed at 2 a.m. His name on the screen, just an address, nothing else. I arrived the next day to a loft that looked like it belonged in a design magazine. Clean lines, too much glass. Julian opened the door, a towel slung around his neck, his t-shirt still clinging to damp skin, hair curling at his temples from a recent shower. Didn't think you'd come, he said, raising an eyebrow. You texted, I replied, stepping inside, and yet you're here. I wasn't sure if it was a statement or a test, but I was already inside, already too deep to pretend. I was just curious now. We spent hours saying little, but learning a lot. His music taste was sharp and chaotic. His fridge was empty except for champagne and almond milk. He offered me nothing and everything all at once. Somewhere between a sarcastic laugh and a glance that lingered too long, the space between us changed. He reached out once, his fingers brushing mine when we passed each other in the kitchen. No words, just that charged silence. Something shifted, something neither of us wanted to name. Later, he sat beside me on the couch, his legs too close. His scent was sharp and warm, expensive. We talked about everything and nothing, movies, the way people fake smiles, the worst kinds of silence. Then, without preamble, he said, You don't look at me the way most people do. How do they look at you? I asked, half curious, like I'm either a puzzle or a paycheck. And how do I look at you? His eyes met mine, and it was like he wanted to know what I tasted like. I swallowed. Julian leaned in, slow and unapologetic. His lips stopped just short of mine, waiting. I didn't move. I didn't need to. He kissed me like it wasn't the first time, like we'd done this before and never wanted to stop. It wasn't soft. It wasn't unsure. It was possession disguised as curiosity, the kind of kiss that tells you you're already losing control. I didn't stop him. Not when he moved closer, not when his fingers ghosted the edge of my jaw. The heat rose slowly, pulsing, growing into something undeniable, the way his hands slid against my sides, the way his mouth pressed hungrily to my neck. It didn't feel like a mistake. It felt like something overdue. But the story didn't end there. Oh no, the craziest part was yet to come. The next morning, I wasn't sure if what had happened was real or some strange, intoxicating dream. The scent of him still lingered faintly on my skin, as if the night had stained me. I hadn't stayed over, not entirely, but I hadn't left unmarked either. We hadn't spoken much after things had quieted, and yet something between us had shifted. Something unspoken, but impossible to ignore. He hadn't texted. Not that I expected him to. Julian didn't seem like the type to chase or follow up, and I didn't want to read too much into what we shared, though part of me already had. Still, I went to work, pretending I wasn't distracted, like my mind wasn't replaying the heat of his breath behind my ear, or the way his hands knew just how to explore without asking permission. Mr. Blackwood called me into his office again. I braced myself. "How's it going?" he asked casually, but his eyes were razor-sharp, scanning me like a surgeon. "With Julian?" he added. I tried not to sound defensive. "Yes." "How's it going?" he asked again, the question weighing heavier now. I swallowed. "He's interesting, smart, guarded. But is he opening up?" I hesitated. "He's starting to—" Mr. Blackwood's lips twitched, almost like a smirk, but it never quite reached his eyes. "Good. Keep going." That was it. No mention of money, no warning, just an order disguised as a suggestion. He waved me out like he'd already moved on to more important things. I left the room feeling more like a hired spy than a real person. Later, Julian messaged me. "You free tonight?" "For what?" I replied, teasing. "Don't start. Just come." No location, no details, just that same address. I went. When I arrived, the lights inside were low, shadows stretching across the walls like they were listening in. Julian sat on the couch, barefoot, a hoodie draped over his shoulders like armor. He didn't bother to fasten it. He looked up slowly, like he'd been waiting for me longer than he wanted to admit. "Hey," I said, setting my keys on the counter. "Hey." No kiss, no rush, just that strange, humming energy between us. He nodded toward the couch. I joined him. We watched some old indie movie he said he liked but barely paid attention to. His arm rested behind me, his fingers occasionally brushing my shoulder, like they were tracing a thought. I didn't ask questions. Neither of us did. We were just there, tangled in a silence that didn't need to be filled. Eventually, he leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what this is, but I don't want it to stop." I turned my face toward him, then let it keep going. And it did. Slowly, beautifully. We didn't rush. That night was softer. Fewer words, more space between every breath. His hands moved slower, like he was memorizing instead of claiming. The heat was there, burning under the surface, but it was gentler this time, like something sacred we weren't ready to name. When his fingers found mine and held them tightly, it said more than anything either of us could have spoken aloud. Later, I lay beside him. I watched as his chest rose and fell, his jaw relaxed in sleep. I wasn't sure if this moment was real or just a fragile pause before everything caught up to us. And yet, part of me still wanted to fall anyway. I was starting to care, and that made everything else so much harder. The weeks passed like that, days at work, nights with Julian. The money still came, tucked quietly away in my account, but I stopped checking. It didn't matter anymore, not compared to the way he started texting me first, the way his kisses lingered, the way he opened drawers for me in his kitchen like I belonged there. He showed me a version of himself I don't think he shared with anyone else, not the cold, distant persona people whispered about, but a boy who read poetry late at night, who fell asleep with music playing softly beside him, someone who hated wearing shoes, had a strange obsession with scented candles, and felt everything, even if he didn't always show it. But the closer we got, the harder it was to ignore the truth. He didn't know, and I was still lying. One night, we were at his place again. Dinner delivered, wine half finished. Julian was stretched across the couch, his head in my lap, eyes half closed. "My dad said something weird today," he murmured. I stiffened. "Yeah?" He asked if I was happy. I played dumb. "And what did you say?" Julian opened his eyes, looking up at me. I told him I was starting to be, for the first time in a long time. Something twisted in my chest. He reached up, brushing his fingers across my cheek. "And you know the crazy part? It scares the hell out of me." "Why?" "Because I know what happens when things feel good. They don't last." I leaned down, kissing his forehead. Maybe this time's different. But even as I said it, I knew we were on borrowed time. 2 days later, he showed up at my place unexpectedly. No warning, no text, just him standing at my door, looking like the world had shifted beneath his feet. I need to ask you something, he said, his voice tight. I stepped aside, my heart already racing. Okay. He walked in, then turned to face me. Did my father pay you? The silence that followed felt like it could have cracked concrete. My throat dried up. Julian's face didn't change, and that made it worse. I asked him today, he said quietly. Straight up, and he didn't deny it. He just said it was complicated. I couldn't lie anymore, not with his eyes burning into me like that. Not after everything we'd shared. He did, I said, barely above a whisper. At the beginning, he nodded slowly, like he'd already known. And now? I stepped toward him. I don't care about the money, he said flatly. I care about you. But it started as a job, I said, my voice trembling. You were paid to get close to me. I didn't expect to feel anything. He clenched his jaw. But you did. Yes. The silence stretched again. He looked at me like he was trying to decide whether to hate me or believe me. I don't know what to do with this, he said softly. You don't have to do anything, I said gently. I just need you to know that what we have now, it's not fake. He didn't speak. He just walked past me and out the door. I didn't stop him. I didn't have the right to. And just like that, the world we'd built collapsed. But everything we'd built was still standing on a fault line, quiet, fragile, and waiting for the next shift. I spent the next few days in a haze, caught between a desperate need for reconciliation and an overwhelming guilt that gnawed at me every waking moment. Every time my phone lit up, or the reflection in a window reminded me of Julian's face, I felt that sharp sting of regret. I knew I had crossed a line, and the consequences were already echoing in the silence of our recent conversations. I tried to bury myself in work, but every spreadsheet, every board meeting was a reminder of the transaction that had ignited this impossible connection. Mr. Blackwood's earlier directives and measured nods replayed in my mind like a relentless loop. There was no escaping it. The money had been deposited. The contract was unspoken but understood. And I was left to untangle the fallout of playing with someone's trust and heart. I recalled Julian's eyes the night he left my apartment, cold and distant, as if a part of him had permanently sealed off from me. I replayed every word from his questions about his father's motives, remembered the quiet despair in his voice as he admitted he felt manipulated. I thought of my own rushed confession that barely scratched the surface of the truth. I had promised him something real, something that I now feared might never materialize. In the midst of my self-reproach, a message appeared on my screen. It was from Julian. We need to talk. Tonight, 9 p.m. at the old rooftop cafe. I hesitated only a moment before replying, aware that any delay might drive him further away. My fingers trembled as I typed, unsure if I was seeking forgiveness or merely confronting the inevitable fallout. That evening, I arrived at the rooftop cafe, a secluded space high above the city where the neon lights blurred with the darkening sky. The air was cool, and the hum of distant traffic provided a steady, indifferent background. I sat at a small table, my mind racing with every possible scenario of what the conversation might bring. When Julian appeared, his posture was tense, his eyes guarded as they scanned my face like he was trying to detect a hint of the man he had once trusted. Without preamble, he spoke. "You've been avoiding me?" I swallowed hard. I wasn't sure how to face you after... My voice trailed off, the words refusing to come fully. He shook his head, the movement stiff. I asked you about the money. I needed to know what it meant for us. His tone was even, measured, yet beneath it lay an undercurrent of hurt. For so long, I felt used. Like every connection, every relationship in my life was measured against some expectation or transaction. And with you, I was desperate to believe that was wrong, that what we had was real. His words pierced me, and I reached out. "Julian," I whispered, "I never meant to use you. I was as surprised as you were. The money, it was just the starting point. I got caught up in something I didn't see coming. I'm so sorry." For a long moment, silence blanketed us, punctuated only by the distant sound of wind stirring the night. Julian's eyes searched mine for answers that I wasn't sure I could provide. "But you did," he finally said, his voice trembling with a mixture of anger and vulnerability. "It started as a job. I knew that from the moment you agreed. But I hoped you'd find something more." His hands clenched on the table, and I could almost see the internal fight he had waged. Tears welled up as I realized how deeply I had hurt him. "I did find more, Julian," I said, my voice breaking. "I found something I couldn't explain, a connection, something genuine, but I understand if you can't believe me now." He leaned back, closing his eyes for a brief moment. "It's not just about belief, is it? It's about trust, and once that's broken, it's hard to rebuild." I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of every moment of deception. "I know, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to rebuild it. I never intended to hurt you. I was scared. Scared of the truth. Scared of what it might mean if I admitted I was falling for you." Julian opened his eyes, the anger softening into something fragile. "And what about your own heart? Were you afraid that you weren't enough for me? That everything you did was just a transaction until you realized you cared?" My throat tightened as I struggled to find the right words. Yes, I was terrified. Every day, I felt like I was living two lives, the one that was dictated by a deal, and the one that was real, raw, and unpredictable. And in the end, the real part took over, but not without cost. He paused, his gaze drifting away, as if lost in memories of a better time. The rooftop around us seemed to close in. The city's lights were a stark contrast to the darkness of the moment. I spent so long thinking that if I kept my distance, I'd be safe. But you made me feel something, made me forget that I was just a pawn in his game. There was a moment of brittle silence before he asked softly, "Do you regret it?" I met his eyes, unsure of how to answer. "I regret hurting you more than anything. I regret letting you believe in something I wasn't prepared for, but I don't regret falling for you. I do regret that I made you doubt what we could be." Julian's gaze shifted downward, his voice quiet and conflicted. "I'm angry. I'm hurt. I feel like every time I try to trust someone, I'm reminded that I'm only ever an option." Aside watched him, my heart racing, trying to read his face, to figure out what was going through his mind. The tension in the room was thick, heavy, like the air before a storm, and I wondered if I was about to lose him for good. My chest tightened as I waited for him to break the silence, but he just stood there, drenched, his eyes distant and guarded. Finally, Julian spoke, his voice hoarse, as if the weight of the past few days had drained him. "I confronted him," he said quietly, his gaze not meeting mine. "I told him everything. I told him I knew about the deal, about everything." I felt a wave of relief and anxiety wash over me at once. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to reach out to hold him, but I was afraid of what might come next. He was still processing, still deciding what to do with the choices that lay before him. His voice broke the silence again. "He didn't deny it," he continued. "Not the money, not the manipulation, but he said something that stuck with me." He paused, and I could hear the uncertainty in his tone. "He told me I had to choose. Either I cut ties with him or I cut ties with you. He said keeping both would be impossible." The words hit me like a punch. My stomach dropped, and for a moment, the world felt like it was spinning out of control. I could see the struggle in Julian's eyes, the battle between his loyalty to his father and his feelings for me. I took a step closer to him, my own heart heavy with the gravity of the decision he had just made. Julian's eyes finally met mine, and for the first time in days, I saw something raw and vulnerable in his expression. "I chose you," he said softly, as if the words themselves carried the weight of everything he had been through. I felt my breath catch in my throat, and a flood of emotions rushed through me, relief, love, and fear all tangled together. My heart swelled in my chest, and I couldn't help the tears that threatened to spill. "You chose me," I whispered, as if repeating the words would make them real, make them permanent. He nodded, his gaze intense, almost as if he were afraid that I might doubt him. I did. And I need you to know, no matter what happens next, I'm choosing you every single day. Without thinking, I crossed the room and closed the space between us, my hands gently resting at the base of his neck, grounding him in the moment. I'll spend every day showing you that you made the right choice, I said, my voice thick with emotion. And then, without another word, he kissed me. It wasn't just a kiss, it was a promise. It was everything we had been through, everything we were still going through, condensed into that one perfect moment. His hands gripped me like he was holding on to the only thing that mattered, and I wrapped my arms around him, pulling him closer, afraid that if I let go, everything would crumble again. When we finally pulled apart, we rested our foreheads together, both of us breathing in the same air, finding comfort in the shared silence. The rain outside began to soften, the storm subsiding, and in that quiet moment, I knew that we had chosen each other, not out of obligation, but because we had found something worth fighting for. I'm scared, Julian whispered, his voice barely audible. I don't know what comes next. I am too, I replied, my voice trembling. But I don't want to be scared anymore, not if I'm with you. His fingers tightened around mine, a silent vow passing between us. I'm not going anywhere. And in that moment, despite all the uncertainty, all the fear, I knew we had taken the first step towards something real, something that was ours to build. Together. We argued, we kissed, we unraveled the knots together. It wasn't easy, but real love never is. What started as a deal became a choice, and then it became a truth neither of us could ignore. We weren't perfect, but we were real, and we were fighting for something that mattered, something that was ours. Some days, when the weight of the past threatened to resurface, we would find ourselves sitting in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. There were moments when the scars of what had happened still made us flinch, when the shadow of Mr. Blackwood's influence lingered in the air, but we refused to let it control us. We refused to let it define us. It was in those quiet, intimate moments when Julian would look at me with that familiar vulnerability in his eyes, the one that always made my heart skip, and he would say, I don't know where we're going, but as long as we're going together, I'm okay with it. And I would reply, that's all I need to know. There were days when I would wake up in the middle of the night, my body tangled in the warmth of him, and feel this overwhelming sense of gratitude. I had spent so much time wondering if it was possible to love someone without losing yourself, and now I knew the answer. It wasn't about losing yourself, it was about discovering a new part of who you are. A part that only exists because of the other person. And with Julian, I was discovering parts of myself I hadn't even known existed. His love didn't fix me, it didn't make everything perfect, but it made me stronger. It made me want to be better, not just for him, but for myself. It wasn't always easy. We fought, about little things, about big things. Sometimes the weight of the world outside our little bubble would press down on us, but we faced it together. We learned to navigate the chaos, the doubts, the fears. It wasn't glamorous. There were no sweeping gestures, no grand declarations, but every moment was real. Every day was a new choice to keep going, to keep choosing each other. And sometimes, when things felt like they were getting too hard, we'd remind each other of how far we'd come, of how, despite the odds, we were still standing. And that made everything worth it. We weren't perfect, but we were ours. A few months later, I stood beside Julian on a quiet street corner, the city's lights twinkling in the distance. There was something about the night that felt different, calmer, more certain. And though we didn't have all the answers, I felt at peace. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about the past or the future. I was simply thinking about the present. You know, I said softly, my voice carrying just enough for him to hear, I think we're going to be okay. He looked at me, his eyes soft, his lips curling into a smile. Yeah, he replied, taking my hand. I think we are. And as we walked down the street together, side by side, hand in hand, I knew he was right. It wasn't about where we were going or what had happened before. It was about where we were now. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were exactly where we were meant to be. Together. The way you've painted their journey is so raw and beautiful, reflecting not just the complexities of their relationship, but the growth they've both experienced. There's such a strong sense of transformation, not only in how they've moved from the deal to a real connection, but also in how they've learned to navigate love, trust, and the weight of the past. It's clear they've both faced challenges, but the message is powerful. Love is about choosing each other, even when the odds are stacked against them. It's not the smooth ride that others might expect, but it's real, and that makes it worth every risk. The way you end this, with Julian whispering, "Still glad you chose me," and the narrator's quiet affirmation, feels so intimate and grounded. It's such a poignant reminder that love, especially the kind that survives hardship, isn't about perfection. It's about showing up for each other, again and again. And that quiet but powerful something real is what truly holds them together. Do you feel like they've fully found peace in their journey, or are there still unresolved pieces they need to confront?